Okay, and welcome to the Franchise Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Giuseppe Grammatico, your franchise guide. And today we have a very special guest. And today's also, what do we hit? Our 70th episode, I believe. Number 70 or 71. I lose track, but we're getting up there. And our goal is 100 by the end of the year. So we definitely have some work to go. So today we have Kisan Patel. Kisan, welcome to the show.
Hey, pleasure to be here, Giuseppe.
So I was on Kisan's show a couple weeks ago on Boss Move. We had a great time, and I wanted to bring on my show and kind of talk about M&A and exactly what that is. So really quick, a little bit of a bio is Kisan is a founder and CEO of M&A Science with a passion to drive M&A industry forward. He was an M&A advisor for 10 years in which he sold larger companies such as commercial banks and hotel chains. Host of a couple shows. We talked about M&A Science and Boss Move. And Kisan, if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you get into what you do today?
Yeah, today I'm CEO and founder of a business called M&A Science, where we have a few different business lines. We actually own and operate an academy program for those people interested in getting a career in M&A or are already in M&A and looking to advance their skills. We have a great program for that. Then we also operate a few technology lines. One is called Deal Room, which is project management software for M&A. We have a data security product called Firm Room. And we also have some publications. We published a couple books around thinking about different ways of managing these large, complex transactions.
Awesome. So how do we talk about M&A, and that got brought up a couple episodes ago. We were talking about that, and just taking a step back, obviously, I know that business. I know what it is. What is M&A? What does M&A stand for? And talk to us a little bit about that. What exactly, and that's a whole topic in and of itself, but for the viewer that maybe is new to that topic.
Yeah, I mean, the simple way, big company buys little companies, the common use case that we think of when we think of M&A. Here's an organization that is looking for opportunities to grow through inorganic means, which means they're looking to find ways to grow quickly, and they may buy a business for that reason. And then I think the other think around that to consider is the rationale for buying another company, which varies quite a bit. That you could simply be buying a company to expand your geographic market share. That, hey, we're in the US and want to expand out to Europe. Maybe we could do that quickly through an acquisition instead of doing it from scratch. And then you may find other areas like in the software space, we'll buy different technologies to increase the capabilities of our product. And then you may just find opportunities that, hey, we have a great sales team, a great distribution network. And if we continue purchasing products and implementing that distribution network, it significantly increases our revenue. So that could be an angle, or just buying people. Like, hey, here's a extremely talented team and they got great capabilities. We could use them in our organization to create value.
That's a great point. And I don't think we talk too much about that. So that's actually a very, very interesting point. So in the franchising world, what we've seen is that it seems to be, once a franchisor has a system in place, in many cases, they may be in, we're just making this up for an example, residential cleaning service, but that is the end product or service, but they really have a system in place. And that system really is a technology engine. So they have powerful CRMs that automate a lot of things, keep track, maybe give price quotes, tell people where to go on a daily basis. It's really automated to the point where customers have apps, and just it helps with reducing headcount and just making the business a lot more profitable, right? Just a lot less costs, automating things, and it's 24/7. You don't have to worry about shifts, time zones, times a day, and things like that. So we've seen that in the franchising world, where once a system is in place, a parent company or a franchise company will start to expand in their business, and they'll have additional businesses will applying the exact same technologies. Maybe it's in the home service. It's from residential cleaning to residential painting and residential lawn care. And we've seen quite a bit of that. But what we've also seen is for companies that don't want to start from scratch, they start acquiring So if they want to add something to the portfolio, such as mosquito spraying as a residential service, home service, they are bringing that, maybe acquiring a company and taking advantage of their systems for all their franchises. So what advantages are there from starting from scratch versus just let's start acquiring and merging with other companies? If I can start from scratch, is it just speed? Can I do this much faster? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and there's some interesting contrast when you look at the franchise model, because
Mhm.
the franchise model, you're essentially templating the business model, and like you gave examples, you're iterating on it, you're identifying what systems work best and so forth. And ultimately, for the end user, owner operator, what it ultimately does is shortens the learning curve. And I've owned
Right.
franchise models before, and it just allows you to get in and really hit the
Right.
ground running because you don't have to figure all this stuff out. There's a lot of value, and that's where you get the biggest upside is getting in there, focusing on just going to market, servicing the customers, creating the value. When we look at having an independent business and growing through acquisitions, where it's
Mhm.
not so much the repeatable model and putting the same template business in different markets, there's a lot more consideration around the strategy. Like, what is that exact rationale? And sometimes we just see the opportunity and we get excited about it and we go after it because it's, oh, we can grow. It's a similar like industry, but there's so much more. You got to have a clear strategy in place, like
Mhm.
some of those examples that we drive to. But it gets a lot more complex because it's not that same template. You're actually doing the opposite. These organizations you're looking to acquire and essentially combine both operate with unique cultures and unique operating models. They're distinctly different from each other.
Mhm.
And if you go through a process of acquiring a business that's distinctly different than yours and being able to combine it, which essentially is we call M&A integration or post-merger integration, you're taking an organization and peeling it back layer by layer. There are processes that they developed over years and you have to change. You change your accounting system to yours. You're going to move their CRM systems. They're using ERP, et
Mhm.
cetera, the payroll benefits. And then at the same time, you're trying to preserve the very thing that keeps them motivated and driven to show up to work, which is their culture and the way of doing things. That's what makes M&A really complicated. You're doing the largest magnitude of change management an
Right.
organization could possibly endure without just trying to disrupt the people and piss them off where they quit and leave and do something else.
And that's it has like, and when you hear M&A, it has kind of a negative connotation, right? It's okay, M&A, who's losing the job, what's going on? And then to your point, culture is a big thing. It's the financials. uh, you put pen to paper, you can figure those out. You can figure out those economies of scales, those synergies. Okay, do we need two finance departments? Can we merge them into one? And the various things in the franchise world, we have call centers and technology departments and things like that. But I think that's key. That's probably one of the hardest parts, right? Is keeping the culture, because that's essentially what really differentiates. You have the product or service, but it's the culture. It's working there day in, day out. You're spending a considerable amount of time of your life at this job. So I think people get nervous. As I mentioned to you, I've three different investment banks I worked for. Every single one of them had merged, and every single one of them caused panic, just because we were from an employee standpoint, I should say, taking a step back from an employee, because I thought maybe I would lose my job. I didn't know if the branch would still be around. So, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, obviously you're the expert in this field. How do they really handle culture? How do they make sure that at the end of the day, the employees, the lifeblood of the business, are truly, are going to stay on, are going to be happy, are going to all be taken care of? Like, how is that handled? That just seems to be especially when you're dealing with these larger companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that gets overlooked. We're going through a big shift in M&A where traditional M&A is very financial focused.
Right.
And back then, businesses were like that. They tend to be very componentized. It wasn't a lot of pieces that you could understand how you put together, where today everything's so different. It's very
Mhm.
much about people. It's very much about a lot of knowledge-based work that happens, and it's people that's driving it. So now we're shifting to more of a people-focused M&A. And when we think about cultures are uniquely different, and the idea of combining them, you're going to end up with one. It's just making sure that there's no, and the polar opposites where things are going to blow up and you're going to
Right.
have some problems. But the better way that I've learned to look at it is think of values. If you can get these CEOs of these two organizations to get together and understand each other's values and how that value lends to the way they operate their businesses, and then really objectively look at how their businesses would come together. Because they may understand then that we have really different values that
Mhm.
lends to different ways of operating. So
Right.
think of, we have a heavy top-down type of management culture, and another company is more of a tech-oriented company that has this agile, very collaborative culture.
Right.
We empower people to make their own decisions versus we're empowering you to take orders and listen to, the person you're reporting to. Very different, and just
Mhm.
combine those companies, very different ways of making decisions and things of that sort. But I think getting that understanding up in front, stemming it off of what are the business values and talking those through will give you that alignment, if it even makes sense to really push this deal to that point of transacting based off of that.
Not some great points. I think it's, going through the three mergers. I think it's key when CEO and the leadership steps up, not just with a formal statement, but then they just have, just not just a press release, a town hall, a meeting where you could sit down and just kind of give an overview of what's going on and just put everyone's minds at ease. So I just, having this conversation just brings me back to those days and just not knowing, right? I mean, I was obviously that was did not own my business then, so that was my primary source of income, and it ended up being fine. I didn't lose my job. It was more worrying than anything else. We were in the sales role, so they needed salespeople to bring in, sales revenue. So we ended up being okay. But it's always interesting to hear, another perspective with M&A Science. So, your company, who actually, maybe we'll start there. Who do you help? Who is the person that reaches out to you? What size, when we talk about size, when we talk about M&A, the size of deals, who is your kind of primary market?
Yeah, well, a lot of the educational materials that we put out are
Right.
geared towards a very broad audience of
Okay.
folks in M&A. So they may be involved with a lot of different areas, in especially a lot of people stereotype M&A and they think of the investment bankers and the boiler room operations and so
Right.
forth. But M&A touches everything. You have this large magnitude of change management that happens when you go through M&A. So you have folks involved early in their deal that are out prospecting,
Mhm.
really taking and driving a strategy to find opportunities of companies to acquire. And then as you progress, you'll have team members that are more involved in the diligence. They're really building out financial models, understanding the potential value of the company, going through really making sure what's represented is true and accurate, looking for the risk in the deal when
Right.
they're going through diligence. And then as they move to the actual integration phase, then they're looking at those systems integrations and ways to combine the companies and the way they operate and take their products out to market. And that's when you start getting, you have everybody involved through diligence integration. You have all the different functions of that organization involved, really trying to figure out how these two entities are going to combine.
Right.
So you end up having so many different roles. On the education side, there's a lot of practice around that. How do you, what are the best practice around collaborating and getting people to work well together, stay
Mhm.
focused on the highest priority tasks, and be flexible or agile to what's the surprises that pop up? Because when you do an M&A deal, you start off with very little information and you continuously acquire more and more information as you go
Right.
through the process, get comfortable with each other. And then as that information comes in, more people get involved, and it gets pretty cumbersome and
Mhm.
complicated relatively quick. So you really want to be able to have a process. Well, while you're going through that and get more information, you'll start identifying more risks. Here's some
Mhm.
things that we didn't find out about. How are we going to
Right.
handle this? Here's a surprise. We didn't know about this lawsuit, whatever it is. And then integration, sometimes if you missed it, then all of a sudden you get a surprise integration. That's an ordeal because you own the business. So that's your problem. So really think of diligence as a practice of minimizing risk, and integration as the practice of maximizing value. You paid for the business, and when you walked away with that model and this now business,
Mhm.
that model essentially gave you this promissory note of what you can potentially build and the value you can potentially create. Well, now it's your job to go out and capture it. You need to
Right.
deliver on that value. And that's where people are really realizing in the industry it's the most critical part, and it's something that needs to be thought about from the very beginning of doing a transaction. Well, and when we look at our core business,
Mm,
Giuseppe, in terms of who we help and work with, it's normally corporate development practitioners. They're typically in large organizations. Think of
mhm.
Fortune 1,000 companies. I would say from a billion market cap and up, and they would often have a dedicated team of corporate development practitioners that are focused on inorganic activities.
Okay.
Primarily, what we work with is M&A, but they may also be involved with other parts, partnerships, and other strategic, growth vehicles as well.
Okay. Very interesting. Talk to us a little bit about the two podcasts. I was on one, but maybe starting off with also called M&A Science. Talk to us about we talked about education and learning from some of the experts, industry experts, people that have actually acquired and merged with other companies. Talk to us about who those guests are and what you talk about in both shows.
Yeah, M&A Science, it was a podcast that started about 5 years ago. At the time, I was struggling with a tech company, getting
Mm.
traction on it and figuring out what the marketing model should be, and a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, man, you should start a podcast." And I was like, "What the hell's a podcast?" Like, "Don't worry about it. It's gonna be the next big thing. Just get on it." And I at the time, I remember I was doing a lot of research. I was pitching, trying to sell to corporate development teams, working with these large companies. The thing that always took me back was the fact that all these organizations had their own way of thinking about M&A.
Mhm.
And it made me realize that the industry itself was so siloed off. There wasn't this standardization, go-to playbook, or sort of single source of way of doing things. When you look at legal, accounting, and how they've standardized a lot of the practices, and obviously, the M&A's got a lot of uniqueness to it because every single transaction is so distinctly unique. But the practice of M&A itself is relatively new.
Mhm.
It's really from the '60s that we started seeing a lot of the corporate mergers
Right.
and activity that's happened, but it's not like medicine where there's centuries and centuries of
Mhm.
practice behind it. So with the understanding that here's underpinning problem in our industry, the fragmentation, the siloness, that's what lended to the idea of utilizing a podcast as a platform to enable practitioners to share lessons learned and really hone in and identify what actually works.
Right.
What are the because M&A is unique and it's so much of a large transaction that happens, but it's all driven by people at the end of the day.
Mhm.
It's not like peer to peer. We're sending currency to each other. That's systems talking to each other. It's very much about a lot of things, a lot of people
Mhm.
that need to get aligned to make that transaction happen. And that's where it's difficult to get those insights. You have to do these qualitative interviews, have these conversations, learn from people's experience. And then as you do a series of these interviews, you identify the patterns and start seeing commonalities between these lessons learned and really hone in on what are these proven practices.
Mhm.
And that's what we do is we'll extract those and we'll publish books. For example, we published a book called Agile M&A, which was based off of the idea that you can use these same practices and principles commonly used in the software industry
Mhm.
for agile software development and apply it in M&A to solve the same problem. When you build software, you have a lot of assumptions on what the customer wants. And
Mhm.
the more you find out, the more you need to iterate and change your plan to deliver them what they actually need.
Right.
Very similar to M&A. You start off with very little information about what you're actually buying. As you get information, you need to be very responsive to it
Mhm.
and be able to have this adaptive model versus creating a giant plan and not being prepared for those surprises and changes. So we had these ideas, and a lot of it was inspired from our own engineering team. I ended up blogging about it, and I don't think a single person read those blogs. But I ended up having conversations with the M&A team at Google and Atlassian
Oh
and
wow.
realized they were actually doing it because of the engineering culture they have,
Mhm.
that they've been able to apply these agile techniques with great success.
Right.
And that led us to actually putting a book together. And I was really fortunate. One of the practitioners I interviewed said, "Hey, don't just write another book. Why don't you make this into a framework so other companies can apply these same
Yeah.
practices?" And that's what led to Agile M&A and creating it as a framework that we took to market that continues to evolve. We have practitioners that'll submit their own plays which are just short write-ups of how-to techniques they to apply in M&A, which we talked about all these different work streams or functions in the
Right.
companies that take on a part of doing a single transaction. Now the practitioners can write their own plays of like, hey, here's how to assess, the leadership in the team
Right.
you're acquiring. Let's talk about who's potentially going to be a flight risk. And how do you develop a retention plan? And now these things are created as plays, and they're on this library that just continues to expand and be an open source research resource for the community.
Yeah, this is great, and that's with podcasts, and they're getting more and more popular, and it's truly just education available 24/7. There's no fee. I tell people just take advantage of them. Listen in. Obviously, pick and choose. There's so many out there, but really, you get some. I think some really great information. I learned a ton before getting into business on some shows, and they weren't as popular then. I didn't even know what the heck really a podcast was, and they're like, it's radio on the internet. That's how someone kind of explained it to me. It's really, I thought it was this whole production. I go, no, it's pretty easy to set up, get some artwork, get a hosting site, and I love it. I love definitely not a writer. I get some great guests like yourself on here, experts talking about various areas, M&A, from funding to legal. So it's great. Sometimes when I'm having a really lengthy call and it's out of my wheelhouse, such as legal entities and the whole legal aspect of the correct legal entity to set up your business and everything that goes along with it. I'm like, let's go back to our attorney on our last episode and listen in there. She's the expert, and by the way, she offers a free consultation anyway. So definitely take advantage of that. So anyway, that was a plug on podcasting. I just such a big fan, and looking forward to kind of continue with this. I was really impressed with the other, what's the name of your second podcast? I was really impressed with that because that was something where we talked about kind of giving back. So talk to us about that.
The second podcast is, it's a bit of a passion project. It originated from, I remember reading Ray Dalio's book, Principles, and I read it with my daughter when she was 7 years old. And
Wow.
it was, and it's probably a really good book for somebody that's just finished their undergrad, and gives them a lot of insights. And here's some life lessons that I've learned along the way. Really great book. And I remember reading to her son. A lot of it was way over her head in terms of the language and the context, but the concepts were not. The concepts got us to having some great conversations that applied to leadership. How do you think about open-minded versus closed-minded? Let's
Right.
define that. How do you interact with somebody that's closed-minded and
Mhm.
get them to become more open-minded? Just thinking about the way your brain works, that we're physically so uniquely, distinctly different from each other, and we see it, but do we acknowledge that our brains actually think just as unique and distinctly different?
Right.
And can we understand how different people would think, and find ways of better accommodating or working with the different types of thinking? So it led up to these great discussions, and it got me thinking about what were my principles? What were my principles that really drove success? And it was one of the things I remember doing a talk to a group of undergrads around that. And I basically resurfaced that talk and
Mhm.
built that principles out, flushed it out. And then I was talking to my daughter about it and said, I'm going to tell you what, dad doesn't know all this stuff. Why don't we
Mhm.
make a point to interview other people,
Mm.
learn from them? So we did a pilot interview with the CEO of Morningstar, which is a great interview to listen to, the first one that we
Oh, cool.
published. And it was interesting. We live streamed it, and he just opened up because he had no idea my child was only 9 years old. So this
Right.
is a little bit later.
Right.
And we get on this thing, record, and I know him. He's the typical boring corporate stuffy
Right.
CEO, and he just opens up like a butterfly. Was so animated and
Oh,
was
wow.
giving her these great responses. And I remember a friend of mine called me right after, and he's like, "Dude, I think you're onto something. Like, we need
Mm.
these little girls to break down these corporate
Yeah.
titans." And it was, but we had a great response. And I thought, this is so interesting because everybody's got a different definition of what their best practices are when it comes to success, leadership. And if you can distill it down to some of these core driving principles, then the way that podcast evolved, like when we got together, was, can I challenge you to break it down into some practical how-tos? Because if we imagine our audience are high school kids and we're talking about being empathetic or being
Mhm.
vulnerable, that doesn't mean anything to them. You got to
Right.
be able to literally break it down
Right.
and give the thinking and give a clarity on what are the behavior patterns you need to develop to actually create that principle, what it actually takes. And that's where it became this fun little theme around what are your top 3 principles, and let's do a workshop to really break it down in some practical steps.
That's great. Yeah. And that's, and I think basically anyone out of school, right? I mean, actually, at any age, right? Because you said your 9-year old or your 7-year old when you read the book, and now 9-year old when she was on the show. Anyone can benefit from this, right? It's some life lessons that I think it's much easier to learn from a show just like this versus a book. I could be wrong. Maybe people learn it in different ways, but I think having a show like that is priceless. And that's kind of the legacy you're leaving for your family, right? From generations to come, where you're almost documenting the key areas, what, to be successful, so that your grandkids and great grandchildren can all benefit from that. So that's, I've heard people say that regarding their shows. They can document their thoughts, advice, and then that's it. In the event I'm not going to be around forever, the internet will live on, so people can always take advantage of those of that great advice.
I agree. It's interesting how it's evolving. It's following a similar path to our other podcast where we're extracting these lessons learned, documenting it, creating a library of those extractions. And I could foresee it becoming another academy program. Think of Khan Academy, but really
Mhm.
focused on life lessons learned.
I like that. No, that's great. We actually we had a few shows, our first couple shows, that we had the idea of transcribing it word for word. Obviously, we went in and made edits and had a copywriter in there, but wrote a book. And because some people just would prefer reading a book than listening to a show. And so then what happens? I get the book out. I'll ask, did you read the book? Well, I just started. I didn't read the book. Do you have an audio version? And I'm like, well, I have the show, but I wanted to transcribe it for the people that like the book. Something in your hand, something you can read. Maybe you're on the beach, you want to pick up a book on the weekend. But now we just did an audio version, not word for word, not an audio book, but the key takeaways and things to consider, just in general about business ownership, about when looking at a business, you could be selective. How do you want your life to be? So we dive into a little bit of that.
I published the same thing. I published a book, and I always joke that probably 100 people in the world actually read it. But it's doing better. Surprisingly, it's doing better than that because I'm getting feedback from it. So, but what we ended up doing is I worked with a marketer, and all she did was take little snippets out of the book, just little, here's a thought, and post it on LinkedIn. And she kept, and I swear we've accumulated well over 100,000 views just and she's still doing it. Just pulls it out, and a lot of times it turns into a discussion thread. I'd say at least half the time it turns into a full on. Sometimes it blows up, and you get a really good. And then what's interesting is I'll ask another marketer. I said, hey, this thread is really, really interesting. Why don't we create a post around it? Just quote the people, extract it. And then we end up writing a blog post out of it. That's, hey, subject matter piece about this, quoting all these people. So it's interesting, but we've had way more success and conversations and interest off of the little short form that we've extracted from the long form than anything else. So my challenge to you would be to do the transcription, use a tool like Descript, and just get the quick AI version of it, and then just put in the small little blurbs and just keep throwing them on social, add quotes constantly. We do that with interviews where even a year later, we'll still pull an excerpt out from that interview and then publish on social media with their picture, and they like it. They're just seeing how we're continuously repurposing content even a year later.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I think nowadays with people just don't have the attention spans, right? They're scrolling quickly online. It's something to grab their attention. When I had created the book, I think the company that helped me out with it said that most people, and they can track this on Kindle, don't get past the first chapter. They said I think the number was 10% pass, or 10% of people actually go past the first chapter, and that number was even smaller to finishing the book. And I thought that was really interesting. But to your point, absolutely repurposing where you can. Our principles are the same. I say a lot of the same things in the business that I'm in, and that's more of figuring out if business ownership is the right fit and how to go about that. But Yeah, that's a great idea. I'll definitely be using that in the near future.
Let's take highlights from this interview and throw them on TikTok and
Yeah,
call it good. We'll get more viewers.
with the dance in the background, my kids are telling me. I'm just like, yeah, I'm not on there, but I have to figure it out. But I see some of the videos, so we could definitely make it fun. So I said we should do a blooper reel. Last show we did earlier this afternoon was full of bloopers. We had to restart a few times. So, it's something funny that really brings about who you are. And that's why people work with me. They'll put up with my crazy personality. And I said, it's always got to be a match with any business. To me, that's a big thing. I like to do business with people I enjoy working with. That's one of my freedoms, being the 4 freedoms that Dan Sullivan from was it Action Coach? Not Action Coach. Dan Sullivan, Strategic Coach. Excuse me for that. But talks about the different freedoms: the time freedom, financial freedom, the freedom of working with the people that you enjoy working with. As silly as that sounds, as a business owner. So, I'm very particular about that. Both in the candidates I work with and other businesses. So, really good ideas. I'm definitely going to. Sometimes we run out of ideas of what to put on social. So, I am very curious, and I'll report back on how that works. In the beginning of the show, we talked about who's listening in, and a majority of the listeners are the corporate executives that are looking to make their first transition to business ownership. What advice? You've been around the block. What advice do you have for them?
Diligence. Do your diligence. That's where I started my career, working with small businesses, and I think that's the one thing I've learned, especially if you're getting like a business with a physical presence. Like, try to be around it. Try to really sit back and just watch. And I think too, there isn't an opportunity to buy a business and just run it and it's easy. And I think every opportunity you have to have this mindset of value creation. What am I going to do to create value? And I like the leadership. I know there's a lot of books on leadership, but that sort of Toyota production thinking of Kaizen, continuous improvement, when you can just sit there and observe and really incrementally find every tiny little thing that you can do to improve. The fact that they're not, the little things like sweeping the odd corners of the room, little things like that.
Mhm.
The vents are dirty. Like, kind of like really get that mindset. I think that helps as a discipline, because then you start thinking it from the low level details to the big picture and some of
Right.
the vendors, relationships. Can you get rebates, contracts, etc.? I think that is the one part to really learn getting into small business early, is that ability to look at things with the opportunity and document all these potential ways of creating value. And then I think the other part is really spending the time to understand what you're getting into. So even if it's like new business franchise or existing business, um, being able to get part of it, like kind of work in that environment. So maybe you were a certain industry you wanted to get into. I don't know. You got a favorite franchise model?
I do not. I can't say that. There's home services have been
Home
doing well.
services.
So yeah.
But I would I would reach out to somebody and saying, "Hey, can I do like a day in the life of a home
Yeah.
service person and, shadow or just hang out?" I would do that just because there's such a big commitment to it. It's more than a career. It's a career commitment with some money behind it. You're putting your equity there. And you really want to make sure you're passionate about it. And I like to look at things, I think, from going from the early to more recent, is the problems that you're solving. When
Mhm.
you can look at this whole world and look at those opportunities of obviously delivering value to the customer, but as essentially you're solving a problem for them in some shape, way, form. And when you're understanding and you're really passionate about that problem solving part, that this is something I really enjoy doing, that part, and I think that allows you to stick in the industry a lot longer.
Mhm.
I've struggled with it where early years I've done businesses purely because the numbers look good, the margins look good, but then after a while I get burnt out and want to shift and change. So when you have something that, now I'm in the business for 10 years straight, and you'll see that your success that exponentially grows when you stick to something for a while, especially longer you get into it. You just become that domain expert,
Mhm.
you're subject matter expert in the field. You, like you said, you start podcasting, own your brand, become the subject matter expert. So I think that part, just really doing the diligence, looking at things with that eye of what exactly am I going to do to create value? So that way, when you do your final assessment of this is what I got to give to get into this opportunity, this is what I can anticipate on getting out. You're putting in this big picture. Am I going to be happy? When am I going to getting out in terms of the passion to solve the problem? But then am I also going to understand that there's this big opportunity in the ways I can add and improve
Right.
what's currently there, and really combine those to not only look at what the numbers look like in front of you, but how you could potentially impact and change those numbers going forward.
Right. No, great advice. That's some really good advice. Um, Someone has a question, wants additional information. What is the best way to either reach you, or if someone has just an interest in M&A or learning more, is it the website? Do they reach out to LinkedIn? What's
Absolutely. I mean, learning about M&A, we have a website, mascience.com.
Mhm.
We have over 350 published pieces of content out there publicly available. And then also myself, I'm on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. It's allowed me to grow my network and have a lot of professional friends around the world. So I'm on there, and it's just Kisan, Kison Patel on LinkedIn.
awesome? And we'll put all that in the show notes. So if anyone has any questions, they could reach out, learn a little bit more. Kisan, it's been a pleasure. Had a great time on your show. Learned a lot on your show. Learned a lot today. I'm going to steal that idea or use that idea of the using the pieces of the book, maybe a couple lines just to see what happens, and I'll keep you posted. That's something. I know we talk about repurposing. I'm not sure why I haven't done that in the past year, so I'm gonna let you know how that goes. But again, thank you for being on the show. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking again very soon.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Look forward to talking again.
Great. Thanks again. Take care.
Bye-bye.